So I have said before, sometimes you've got to look abroad at foreign newspapers to get a really good, accurate sense of what's going on in your own country. And this comes out, of all places, in the New York Times. So this isn't a British person writing about this. This is someone's foreign view and opinion of what's going on in the UK. And I do agree, looking back on this article, it is definitely ringing very true, and it is also quite scary really to think about, because as we've said before, you may have guessed from the title of the video, we're talking about Nigel Farage, and Farage is very, very right-wing. He's very, very corporatist. He has none of what he claims. You know, he is not the man of the people by any stretch of the imagination. Anytime you've seen him in a pub, it has been a carefully staged photo opportunity for him to do so. And I'm just going to echo this point because I think this is quite a good point to make, and it is basically the title of the article. Nigel Farage is the most dangerous man in Britain. He is the most effective demagogue in a generation. Now he sets the agenda. Nigel Farage is the British crisis in human form. His party, the unambiguously named Brexit Party, which is hardly a party and doesn't exist and didn't exist 6 months ago, nearly won a third of the British vote in the recent European parliamentary elections, putting it in the first place and driving the shattered Conservative Party into fifth. Long underestimated, Mr Farage has done more than any politician in a generation to yank British politics to the hard nationalist right. He is one of the most effective and dangerous demagogues Britain has ever seen. With his last political vehicle, the UK Independence Party, or UKIP, Mr Farage took an assortment of Tory retirees and a smattering of ex-fascists and other right-wing cranks and welded them together in a devastatingly political weapon. A significant national party. That weapon tore such chunks out of the Conservative share of the votes that the party leadership felt compelled to call a referendum on Europe, which it then lost, and Mr Farage declared victory and went into semi-retirement as a pundit. Now, almost 3 years later, after the Brexit vote, he is back, and his timing couldn't have been better. After a lost decade of declining living standards and flat wage growth, trust in Parliament and the news media is at rock bottom. The Conservatives are disintegrating. Prime Minister Theresa May is on her way out of office, having failed to secure a parliamentary majority for a Brexit deal. She failed because rather than seeking cross-party consensus, she tried to placate her own hard right and prevent voters from abandoning the party. Again, unthinkable to do so, she has simply hardened public opinion. A poll found in April that given a choice between remaining in the European Union and leaving with a no deal, 44% of Britons support a no deal. The vast majority of these voters previously supported the Conservatives. And this is obviously comes from the Conservative poll that they did recently. But since they are the party of businesses, they can't seriously contemplate leaving without a deal, nor can Parliament. The resulting stalemate, combined with an election in which the main parties barely campaigned, presented Mr Farage with an easy target. And thanks to his success, there is enormous pressure on the Conservatives to deliver Brexit in October, deal or no deal. Boris Johnson, likely to replace Mrs May as Prime Minister, is now pledging to do just that. The Brexit Party's campaign was a one-man show. While it was a sophisticated digital strategy, the party has no members and no manifesto, and none of its candidates were democratically selected. It offered only one policy, a no-deal Brexit. Its rallies focused on star performances by Mr. Farage, introduced with a thundering motivational music. He is a gifted commentator, verbally dexterous and with a sense of humour. Like many English reactionaries, including Mr. Johnson, he speaks in a nostalgic old world register. He doesn't talk about taxes or privatisation. He talks about unfairness and loss, about the sovereignty supposedly ceded to Europe, immigration and elite cosmopolitans. And he names a placebo solution within reach: Brexit, the Great Escape. It's a powerful antidepressant. It is ironic that Mr. Farage appeals to people who are besieged by precisely the kind of volatile financial capitalism that he champions. He is like the President Trump, the paradoxical figure, the capitalist populist. He made his money as a city trader during the boom years of the 1980s, reveling in his adrenaline-fueled, heavy drinking culture. He is the Gordon Gekko of British politics. It's striking to those who care to look just how much his agenda is about class interest. He espouses the extended... He opposes, shall we say, extended maternity leave, raising the minimum wage and reducing the retirement age, anything that inconveniences his nouveau rich confederates. If he had his way, and many of his supporters would be working harder, longer, and for less money, with less protection. That is indeed his Brexit dream, Singapore on the Thames, which, again, we've talked about this before. This is exactly what the Brexit dream is. And it's certainly the dream of the people who are pushing Brexit, like Nigel Farage. If you generally seriously think Nigel Farage cares anything about you, then why doesn't he care? And why does he oppose so many of the things that would make better the lives of so many people who actually support him? There you go. So even his racism is class-bound. Mr. Farage's problem is not just with immigrants, it seems, but with poor immigrants especially. Those from Eastern Europe or Muslim countries, or those with HIV. He has said they would be uncomfortable with Romanians as neighbours, but he married a woman from Germany. He hates the European Union because of its moderate social legislation and free movement defy what he thinks is a Darwinian cultural ecology through which some rise and others fall. It was a mistake to overstate his white working class base. UKIP indulged plenty of professionals and managers, but he has wooed many older white workers removed from the centre of financial power where he has built his career. Some were ex-Labour voters with manual jobs. His offer to them is that in a society of dog-eat-dog competition, they will not have to compete with foreign workers, which is why the liberal press mudraking about his racism and far-right connections by itself generally doesn't work. Far from impeding Farage, racism is his ticket to success. It puts him on the same side as his poorest voters. With Parliament in deadlock and the Conservatives kneeling their death throes, Mr. Farage has spotted an opportunity, a new political model, inspired by the five-star movement in Italy, a digital platform that harnesses the free labour of its users through them, the participation through content sharing and online polls, rather than rights. Parliamentary democracy is slow at best of times, and these are not the best of times. Such platforms, however, introduce volatility to the system. Dropping UKIP, a traditional membership party, he launched something like a vulture capitalist startup with crowdfunders rather than members and a chief executive rather than a leader. Hence the Brexit Party. Unlike older party models, it doesn't invest in lasting infrastructure. It is a nimble-footed expert at gaming social media, the stock market of attention. It won the battle for clicks and it made a killing this election. Such online frenzies are akin to disabling the flows of hot money, forcing legacy parties to adapt or die. But when Parliament is so weak, its legitimacy is tenuous, and it can look like a democratic upsurge. That may be Mr. Farage's ultimate triumph. The quintessential city trader and apostle of cutthroat competition, he is exploiting the democratic crisis to remake politics in his own image. And this is something that we are going to have to fight. You know, we want our working class to have longer maternity leave. We want there to be a higher minimum wage. We want them to have rights so that they cannot be abused by people who are in charge of the wealth like Nigel Farage. Nigel Farage bangs on constantly about the metropolitan elite, but there is no one more metropolitan elite than Nigel Farage. And here's the big thing, guys. If you sympathise with Nigel Farage's position and you don't want to compete with, quote, cheap European labour, then you've got to first of all reconcile two things. First of all, there is minimum wage in this country, meaning that no one can be paid lower than that minimum wage. So you're paid minimum wage, so is your friendly neighbourhood immigrant. Like it or not, they get the same wage as you for doing that same job. Now, the other thing that you have to bear in mind is when you look at the immigration stats. Because this isn't just now, this is pre-Brexit as well. The stats are unanimously clear. The majority of immigrants to this country come from outside the European Union. They're not members, they are not part of the European Union, they do not have the same rights as an EU immigrant does. They are from outside the EU. That is a fact. And we have far stronger immigration laws that we could use on these people. But we haven't. Why haven't we? Well, that is because the Conservative Party is one of business. And of course, if you were to say, put, shall we say, tougher immigration restrictions on the non-EU migrants, this would cause a problem for business. Not only that, you also have to contend with the problem that an EU migrant is worth far more to this country than a non-EU migrant. Not only do they pay more in taxes, but they take less out of the system. And that is a fact. And if you cannot get your head around the fact that that is better, and that maybe your Romanian neighbour, or even, the person that's emigrated from the Caribbean, or one of the African, countries that come here very often, you are in the same boat. You want to have the same rights as they do, which are going to be under threat from the likes of people like Nigel Farage. And it's time that we started talking about Nigel Farage's real beliefs. Ask yourselves this. Why, if you are still, after watching this video, you are still very pro Nigel Farage, I want to ask you this simple question. Why does Nigel Farage oppose longer maternity leaves, less rights for workers? He resists imposing the higher minimum wage for workers, meaning that they would get paid more. And by the way, economically, raising the minimum wage would be a good thing for this country. Just go through the things that we went through there. On this article, why does he oppose all these things that would help so many people do this? Why is he so against lowering the retirement age? As I said there, most of the people that support Nigel Farage are going to end up working for longer, have less rights for less money. These people are being conned, and we need to start speaking to these people. And it's very obvious now that I think there is going to be another referendum. And we need to start talking to all these people who feel left out about, look, it's not the EU that has left you behind. It's been Westminster that has left you behind. And people like Nigel Farage, they're not going to help you. Very often on We Are Barnsley, there are people who comment who say, well, if only the Brexit Party were in, somehow things would be better. You know, they have no manifesto, so how can you prove that they will be better? It's unanimously stupid, but there you go. A Brexit Party majority in Westminster would be worse for the working class. And if they ever, if they won and Nigel Farage became Prime Minister, he would be the worst Prime Minister for the working class in decades, in probably a generation. And that's not hyperbole. That's not just me being, alarmist. That is the actual truth of what will happen. And when Nigel, God forbid, if he ever does become Prime Minister and he takes away your rights, you've got no one to blame but yourself because you put him there. And we will have to fight to regain all the rights that we lost. And one of the fastest ways we can re-get those rights is by rejoining the EU. And that's what we've got to do. Our objective now for us is, first of all, campaign to remain in the EU. It's the only reasonable option and sensible option at this point. It solves all our problems. Staying in the EU is perfectly fine. We stay in. What then happens is that we then need to lead a proper grassroots revolution focusing on traditional left-wing values. So, tax the rich, tax the corporations, make sure that they can't exploit workers, get rid of zero-hour contracts. All these, traditional left-wing things, that's what we need to get on the agenda. That's what we need to pass. Because I'll tell you this now, Nigel Farage doesn't care. He doesn't care about your workers' rights. He doesn't care about if you got rid of minimum wage and your wage suddenly dropped to like $3.50 an hour because, well, that's capitalism. And, well, can't you go work at another factory or maybe have 2 jobs? Because that's what Nigel Farage will do, and that's what he will say. And this one, the New York Times article, has got it 100% spot on. He is the most dangerous demagogue in the UK in a generation.